My name is Chris Hewer, and I am a Christian student of Islam. First of all, I began my academic career by studying Christian theology, and then I started to explore and study about Islamic theology too. And over the last 40 years, I have been moving between these two faith traditions, helping people to understand better what it is actually that Islam and Christianity actually stand for. Because sometimes people get very strange understandings, or they don't understand. They get strange misunderstandings of what they think the other faith is about. So my work is like being a bridge. And over this bridge, people pass. Those who are wanting to understand more about Islam pass in one direction, and those who are Muslims who are wanting to understand about Christianity, they pass in the other direction. Well, you might ask, why is a Christian dedicating 40 years of his life already to the study and teaching about Islam? And the answer really is this: there is only one God, that both Christians and Muslims are worshipping the one and only God. Now, if Muslims are worshipping God and Christians are worshipping God, then who are we to tell God that God cannot communicate, that God cannot reveal the way of life that pleases God to both communities? And so I ask myself, what is God saying to me as a Christian in and through Islam and through those fundamental sources of Islam, that is the Quran, the text of scripture which Muslims have, and also the Prophet Muhammad, whose whole life was about putting that teaching into practice. Now, wouldn't I be terribly arrogant if I said, I have nothing to learn, God cannot teach me anything, in and through the Quran, Muhammad, the way of life of the Muslim communities? Muhammad died around 1400 years ago, and over these 1400 years, Muslims have been in every major language, in every major philosophy, all over the world. Some very smart people have been Muslims. Today, the latest research would indicate that probably there are something like 2 billion Muslims on earth. And so the way of Islam is something much more sophisticated, much more subtle, much deeper than the sort of thing that we hear in our Western media, that we read in our newspapers. And so my job is to help to take people into a deeper and better rooted understanding of what Islam is really like. Now, the Quran never says that it is guidance for a bunch of people called Muslims. Rather, it's guidance for all humankind. Similarly, Prophet Muhammad is not spoken of as a blessing for a group of people called Muslims. Rather, he's a blessing for all humankind. He's a blessing for all the worlds. Therefore, by opening up the teaching of the Quran and of the Prophet and all that is built on that foundation, we too can learn something about what it is to be human, what it is to be in a relationship with the rest of the creation around us, and also what is it to be in a relationship with God. That is the fundamental foundation of my work. To do this work as a Christian is an act of worship of God, because God comes to liberate people from ignorance. God comes and wishes for justice to be amongst the peoples of the earth. And we will never have peace on earth until we have deep understanding, and that deep understanding then can lead to justice. And when there is justice, then peace can flourish. So this is the work of understanding. It is the work of peace building. It is the work of helping us all to become more human. One of the really important people from the very earliest times of Islam is a man called Ali. And Ali is respected by all Muslim schools from all different groups. And so we want to focus a little bit on his life, on the way that he led the Muslim community, and also to see what he demonstrates about good human characteristics, good moral life. So who was Ali? Well, his full name is Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ali the son of Abu Talib. So obviously, Abu Talib is the person we should start with. Now, Abu Talib was the uncle of Muhammad. And when Muhammad was a small boy, both his parents died, and so it was his uncle Abu Talib who brought him up, who trained him, and who taught him the business of being a camel-train merchant. Now, later on, when Muhammad was grown and married, there came hard times for Abu Talib, and so he asked Muhammad if he would take his young son Ali into his household and allow him to live as part of his family. And so Ali becomes a member of the household of Muhammad. He is his cousin, and he comes as a young boy, maybe 6 years of age. And Muhammad is by this time about 30, and so he becomes, as it were, a role model, someone on whom Ali could model his life, a kind of father figure. Now, as Ali grew up, he was able to just drink in the way of life of Muhammad. We call this his sunnah, his customary practice, what he said, what he did, how he conducted himself, his character, his ethics. And so it was in this way, even before the start of the revelation of the Quran, that Ali had become someone who was a close follower of Muhammad. Once the revelation began, the revelation of the Quran, Muhammad was told to call together an assembly of his family and to explain to them that he had been called as a prophet. And the one who was the first and strongest to declare his faith in Muhammad and to accept him as a prophet was Ali. And so from now on, Ali knew that he was not only learning about good human characteristics from Muhammad, but also he was learning the way of God, which was lived out by the prophet. Ali was a highly intelligent young boy, and he learnt to read and write, which was unusual in those times. So that when the Quran was starting to be revealed, Ali was one of a couple of people who were appointed as official scribes. Their job was to take the Quran down in written form from the lips of Muhammad. So he becomes very important in Muslim history. But because he lived in the Prophet's household, he was not only the one who could write it down, but he was able to ask questions of the Prophet and to discuss with him much more than anybody else. And so he was regarded right across the young Muslim community during the Prophet's lifetime and afterwards as someone of great knowledge and wisdom about the way of Islam. When Ali grew to be a man, Muhammad arranged that he should marry Muhammad's daughter Fatima. No one else was regarded as being a suitable person to marry Fatima. She was special, and so was Ali. And so the two of them were married together, and then we see some episodes from their life together as a young family. So there is one example when their two sons, Hassan and Hussein, were both ill. And so Ali and Fatima pledged that they would make a fast for 3 days as a way of asking God's help that their two sons should be healed. Now, a fast meant that you didn't eat or drink anything during the daylight hours. So you can imagine that as the sun began to set in the evening, thinking of eating something and drinking something was a high priority. Anyway, on the first night of this 3-day fast, as they were about to eat, a poor beggar man came to their house looking for food. And so they gave him the food that they were about to eat themselves. So they only had water to break their fast. The next day they fasted again according to their promise. And at the end of this day, again, a homeless person, somebody who didn't have any money and didn't have anywhere to live, came asking for food, an orphan. And so again, they gave him the food that they were about to eat, and they only had water to break their fast. And then on the third day, as they were about to break their fast again, there was a prisoner who had been released and who had nothing to eat and nowhere to go. And so again, they gave him their food that they were about to eat. So we see something here, some important lessons. First of all, this is both Ali and Fatima with this degree of dedication together. Secondly, their dedication to promise something and to put it into practice required a great deal of faith, of commitment, and of willpower. But also we notice that those people who came looking for food were amongst the poorest, the most disadvantaged people in that society. And that gives us a clue, because cherishing and looking after the poor and the needy and those who were in some way disadvantaged became hallmarks of the life of Ali and of his wife Fatima. Now, going right the way back to the time when Ali was a boy growing up in the household of the Prophet, he had been sent out at night to do charitable works in the name of the Prophet. but to do it at night so that nobody would notice. And he would be sent out with a sack of bread, and he would leave a loaf of bread on the threshold of all those people who were known to be hungry and in need in that community. And notice, nobody knows it's Ali doing it, so he's not looking for glory himself. And also, he doesn't make the people beg or come even to ask for bread, but he respects their human dignity. He knows their need, and he looks after their need. So we can see the kind of character of the young person even before he was a family man himself. But then in his own household, he insisted that they should eat only ordinary coarse bread like the poor people did, and to eat simple food. And he said that for anyone who should be a leader in the community, they should live like the poorest in the society that they live in. So in the same way then, we see all the way through his life, he's wanting to identify with ordinary poor people. Even during that period when he became the head of the community and could have lived, as it were, in a palace, he chose to live in a simple house so that people would approach him, so that people always knew that here's someone we can knock on his door and he will listen and take care of us. Ali was someone who left after him some very important sayings so that they would help other people to reflect on their own lives. So on one occasion, for example, he says, "How can you hope for mercy yourself if you're not prepared to show mercy to other people?" And again, he says that those who oppose him are not to be treated as enemies, but rather as misguided friends. And even those who opposed him in battle, he prayed that they should acknowledge their wrongdoing, they should be forgiven by God, and that they would all meet together again happily in paradise. Now, this was a time in which there was a good deal of opposition to the infant Muslim community. You see, the message that Muhammad was preaching was first and foremost, there is only one God. Human beings are called to worship this one and only God and to leave aside all else. Now, the people of Mecca, where Muhammad was born, were originally idol worshippers. They had hundreds of idols there, and the Bedouin coming from the desert would come to Mecca in order to worship and pay respects to their idols, but at the same time, of course, to buy the provisions that they needed for the next number of months of their travels in the desert. So here we have pilgrimage, religious worship, going hand in hand with merchandise, with trading. So the merchants of Mecca were the first people to oppose the new message of Islam. Because if Muhammad was telling people, don't be worshipping your idols anymore, worship only the one and only God, then maybe they wouldn't come and buy their goods anymore. Maybe they would lose their trade. And so it was the merchants of Mecca who were provoking opposition to Muhammad, to the message of Islam. And in this early Muslim community, we're talking here about the first 10 or 12 years, only really about 300, 350 people followed the way of Islam, and they were often persecuted. Now, nevertheless, even his enemies in Mecca knew that Muhammad was a trustworthy person. They knew that they could rely on him to be honest. And so they would give him their treasures, their money, their jewelry, whatever, into his safekeeping. He was a bit like a banker or a safekeeper in that community. Now, when the time came that Muhammad and the early Muslim community were going to leave Mecca and go to Medina, Muhammad wanted to be sure that every one of those goods that had been entrusted to him were given back to their rightful owners. And so this was the duty that he gave to Ali. He knew that he could trust him to return all these treasures. But more than that, there were those people amongst the Meccans who opposed Islam and who wanted to try to kill Muhammad. And so, when Muhammad was going to make his journey from Mecca to Medina, a sort of decoy was set up. Ali was to sleep in Muhammad's place, so that if they came then looking to kill him, they would find Ali instead. And here we see Ali full of bravery, of courage, fearless, being willing to take on this task in order to preserve the life of the Prophet and to preserve his message. And indeed, that is what happened. Ali slept in the Prophet's place. When the assassins came, they found Ali there instead. And after that, after all the goods had been given back, Ali made his own journey to Medina. Now, once they got to Medina and began to build a Muslim community there, the merchants of Mecca didn't leave them alone. There were several battles, there were several skirmishes between the Muslims of Medina and the people of Mecca. Now, often what would happen is that in order to spare human life, a champion from each side would come forward and they would fight each other in single-handed combat. Now, if you are going out to face the enemy single-handed, you need to be a person of great faith and trust, as well as somebody skilled with bravery, with courage. And we see on many occasions, Ali was the one who volunteered to be the single-handed champion of the Muslim community. And he would, in this way, go and face the enemy in the hope of being able to prevent the battle having to go any further and to save human life. One of the things that Muhammad taught was that all our actions are based on the intention which underlies them. So the intention has to be correct in order for the action to be acceptable. Now we see one occasion in which Ali was in single-handed combat with one of those from the enemy camp. And he actually had overpowered his enemy and had him on the ground and was about to deliver the fatal blow. And the man spat into Ali's face. So Ali stood up, sheathed his sword, and walked away. And his companions said to Ali, "What are you doing? You had him beaten. You had him on the ground. You should have killed him." And Ali said, "I would have done if I could have done it before he spat in my face. But once he spat in my face, I was then so angry, I would have killed him out of anger for revenge instead of for the right motive." And so we see how even in a crucial situation like this, the right intention, the right motive is part of the lived example of Ali. Now, after the death of the Prophet, there was confusion within the Muslim community, and they couldn't agree on who should be the rightful person to head the community afterwards. Many thought it should have been Ali himself because they thought this was the will of God. But others were of a different opinion. And so there was a number of years in which other people were the leaders of the community. But still we see them coming to Ali and asking his advice because they acknowledged that he was a person of integrity, of knowledge, of wisdom, and of a deep faith and piety. Eventually, in the year 656, Ali was asked if he would become the next head of the community because his predecessor had been assassinated. Now, Ali showed some reluctance to take this position because he said, "If I take this position, you must understand that I will return to the high principles of Islam. I will return to absolute justice because some corruption had come into place. I will return to the equality of all human beings because there'd been some favoritism. And I will only accept if it is the will of the whole community." In other words, there must be an acclaim and affirmation on the part of the community, because he wanted to be sure that the people were with him. And so it was that Ali became the fourth of the caliphs, the rightly guided caliphs, as the Sunnis say, and the first of the truly ones who should have inherited the leadership of the community according to the Shia. Now, over the next 5 years, all sorts of tragedies occurred within the Muslim community. There were 3 times of significant battles. And so we need to focus on Ali as a leader of the community and also as the commander-in-chief of the army. The first battle, in fact, was that some people didn't want to accept him as the rightful head of the community, and they decided that they would rise up and take arms against him. A civil war, if you like. Even more difficult, one of the leaders of this was one of the wives of Muhammad, the young wife Aisha. And she it was who came to the battlefield riding on a camel. And so it was called the Battle of the Camel. Well, Ali refused to be the first to start the fight. And we see this again and again in his life, as well as in the life of Muhammad and of his successors, to be the first to refuse to fight, because battle was only permissible in self-defense. And also, it is the most serious act of any human being to potentially to be open to killing someone else. But eventually, battle was commenced, and Ali was victorious in this battle. So how does he treat his enemies? First of all, he tells his soldiers, you are not to steal or to take or to loot any of the property of these defeated and killed people. Even though you think they are your enemies, I think that they are fellow Muslims with us who were misguided and took the wrong path. And he prayed that the leaders should be forgiven by God and that they should be again in paradise together. Now, what about Aisha? What about this young wife of the Prophet who had actually been an inspirational leader in the battle? First of all, Ali knew that her brother was amongst his soldiers. Now, in Islamic understanding, it's not acceptable for a woman alone to be traveling without a near relative so that they can ensure their safety and modesty. And so Ali asks her brother to be the escort to take her back to Medina. But also, she is going to need some troops to go with her. And so Ali forms together a troop of about 40 soldiers, but actually they are women dressed in armor like soldiers, in order that her virtue and her dignity should be respected, that apart from her brother, who was the only man, all the rest of those escorting her were women. So we see then this high respect for the dignity of the other and the respect also for their modesty, even as a defeated enemy. And Aisha went back to Medina and lived there in peace until she died. There was another battle, and this is often called the Battle of Siffin. And this was another group, a potential leader in the Muslim community who would not accept the leadership of Ali. And so he came with an army to oppose Ali. Again, Ali refuses to be the first to start a fight. He accepts that he will even lose some of his men in order to try to persuade the enemy not to engage in bloodshed. Eventually, there are some battles, some skirmishes between the two sides, but then there is an offer from the opposition side to go to arbitration. That is to try to negotiate a ceasefire, a settlement. And Ali again decides arbitration is better than fighting because we need to spare a human life. There was amongst those on Ali's side a group of people who did not approve of going to arbitration, and they then become the third of the opponents of Ali during this brief period of his rule. They said that Ali should not have gone to arbitration because that's a sign of not having strong enough faith. If he'd had strong enough faith in God, then he would have gone to battle. God would have given him the victory. And so they said, Ali was a man of weak faith, and therefore he should not be allowed to lead the Muslim community. Now, how does Ali react in this? This is challenging his integrity, his honesty. Well, he goes and he talks, and he talks, and he negotiates, and he discusses. And eventually, a large group of these opponents of his give up their opposition and refuse to be part of any battle. So eventually, there is a battle, and again, Ali wins. But one of those who were defeated in this battle and who survived brings us to the end of the life of Ali on this earth. Because he decided that he was going to assassinate Ali. And he was going to kill him while he was at prayer in the mosque in what was then his capital in Kufa in modern-day Iraq. And so this person approaches Ali when he is at prayer, and he hits him, he stabs him with a poisoned sword or dagger. Ali now has got the poison in his system. He is mortally wounded. It's going to take him a couple of days before he dies. But Ali insists that there should be no mass revenge on his opponents. He insists that his assassin should be treated with dignity and with respect. He should not be chained up in a way that was so painful he couldn't endure it. And ultimately, there should only be justice against the one who killed him, rather than anything that looked like revenge. So we see again one of the fundamental characteristics of the life of Ali is this quest for justice. It's one thing to be the leader in a battle, as Ali was, the commander-in-chief, but no battle is won by the commander alone. Everything depends upon the people. Now, we're not talking here about professional armies. We're talking about the ordinary people who would be prepared to rise up to join their leader and to go into battle. Now, when you're talking about the mass population in this way, the mass grouping of people, they are, of course, open to manipulation and to being influenced. And often what happened during this early part of the history of Islam is that people tried to manipulate the ordinary population, the ordinary people, so that they could twist them to their way of thinking, so that they could turn them against their rightful commander. Now, of course, the commander doesn't want to lose his people, doesn't want to see desertion, doesn't want to see people turning back, because that weakens his position in the field of battle. And often this is what is happening with the ordinary population either being bribed or, as we would say today, being subject to propaganda, to false stories being sent around. If they had had social media in those times, then we can understand the kind of influence that this would have. And so we see Ali having to handle the population as well as think about the tactics, the enemy, the field of battle.